Took us just a touch of technical massaging, but we've assembled a panel. You guys are in a remote location. We won't share what that is, but welcome, Mimi, Zach. We've got a very important topic today. How are you guys?
Great, thank you.
Zach, how you doing? I think we've got your mic on mute.
Yeah, your mic.
Bring that in. So we're going to be talking about a very important topic today. A lot of people have seen the movie that recently hit the internet. We're talking about this documentary called Out of Shadows. Zach, you good with the mic?
I am, but my video is going to be a little unsynced.
No, it's good. It looks good. I've got it all set up over here. So just to give a little background on you two guys, Zach, you've been with us before. You are the former Google engineer who blew the whistle on some really troubling internal findings. Why don't you introduce yourself to perhaps members of the audience who haven't seen you before?
Hi, so my name is Zach Vorhies. I am known as the Google whistleblower. In August, I blew the whistle on Google through Project Veritas, and I delivered 950 pages of their censorship regime to the DOJ and to the public. So, yeah, and I'm also a researcher and, kind of a wannabe journalist. But I break stories and I help whistleblowers come forward now.
Has the DOJ done anything with your material, Zach?
Yeah, they launched an investigation with 51 state attorney generals, plus the city of New York, and some other entity that I can't remember. Oh, yeah, the federal level, too. So there's 3 levels of administration now pursuing Google. Well, they actually say big tech, and they don't say specifically who, but we all know that it's Google. And so that's what the action's been.
Right. And Mimi, you're also an independent journalist. People who haven't seen you before can follow you on Twitter. You are there at Maryam Henein. Is that how I pronounce your last name? Forgive me if I've brutalized it.
It's okay. It's okay. Henein. Like
Henein.
The word inane, but Henein.
And you've been blowing the whistle on all kinds of things. Give us some background on you, if you could.
Yes, I'm a bona fide investigative journalist, and I've been researching and exposing big pharma, big ag, since I made my film Vanishing of the Bees, which is narrated by Ellen Page. And I'm also a functional medicine consultant, and I met Zach because I was doing research on techno-fascism, because I've been censored and banned on multiple platforms, and found out that Google was a drug company, and saw Zach first incognito, and then I saw him on Alex Jones, and I reached out. And here we are amidst this pandemic in the jungle. So
right. And, Vanishing of the Bees is a film that people should definitely see. A lot of people are concerned about 5G and some of the pesticides in the atmosphere. Everyone's very concerned about COVID-19. Everyone's also concerned about human trafficking, about the intelligence agencies invading our lives through big tech, through Hollywood. Now, what we're doing today is we're talking about this film Out of Shadows, not because we're trying to pick on other social media personalities or out of any motivation other than trying to understand what's going on. Now, Zach, I first contacted you about this maybe 2 weeks ago, something like this, because I noticed that when the film came out, just prior to its release, there was a new YouTube channel called Out of Shadows, and it came out of nowhere. It had a trailer that featured Kevin Shipp, who people have seen on Crowdsource the Truth many times. Kevin was the co-host on a show called The Intelligence Assessment. And I knew that Kevin had been working on this documentary. He had participated as on-screen talent in his capacity as a former CIA officer. And I knew that Tiffany was essentially the producer, the writer. She was the auteur of this film. So it was strange to me that it appeared not on Tiffany's Twitter, where she's got a huge following. She didn't have it on her Patreon page. She didn't have it really anywhere associated with her really substantial social media following. So I just texted Kevin, which I do frequently, asked
Kevin
him.
Shipp?
Yeah. I just asked him, you know, how did this thing get so many views so quickly? It was a 40-second video of Kevin that had about 100,000 views. And so, Zach, that's when I contacted you, because you obviously have intimate knowledge of the inner workings of the YouTube algorithms. And the thing is, I've produced dozens of videos with Kevin Shipp, some of them 20, 30 minutes, some of them as long as 2 hours. He's sharing really extensive details of his knowledge of the CIA and the deep state and the shadow government. And those videos struggle to get beyond 50,000 views after several weeks. It just seems strange to me that this video from an unknown YouTube channel would go to 100,000 views. Can you speak a bit, Zach, about the algorithm, about how quickly things get to that type of viewership?
Yeah, so the organic algorithms that feed the recommendation engine are based upon a very important user metric called engagement. And roughly speaking, that's whenever you interact with a video in any capacity, to rewind it, press play, and the more engagement that a video gets, then the more the recommendation engine will push it out there and make it go viral. Now, if some of those users that are driving traffic to a video are simulated, like let's say they use a piece of software called Selenium WebDriver. We actually use this at Yahoo. I'm sorry, at YouTube when I was doing development of the YouTube embedded app. And what it does, this Selenium WebDriver for Python will go through and control your web browser and physically take the mouse pointer and put it to a certain location, and then click the button. And so you've probably heard about these things called click farms. It's basically the same thing. An influence operation can set up a whole bunch of automated systems that will boost certain videos that they want up. And I don't know what extent this is used, but I believe that this is being in use today.
I agree with you. We've seen some really anomalous behavior on some videos where sometimes they come out and get a tremendous amount of views. I mean, the thing that really struck me about this is that we had a fairly straight apples to apples comparison, in that I had a huge library of videos that featured Kevin Shipp, and I had them on a channel that had many more viewers. How does the number of subscribers, Zach, affect the uptake of a particular video? If I put out a video about, let's say, Kevin Shipp on a channel with 100,000 subscribers, how would you expect that to perform just on the basis that it contains a given individual versus a channel with 10,000 subscribers?
I mean, the way that I've noticed it is it's pretty much proportional to the amount of subscribers that you have. Mm-hmm. So, I like to use a metric like Red Pill 78, though he's a really high engaging channel because his content is current topics, and so you kind of have to come back. But let's just say it's like, if someone's got 100,000 subscribers, then each video is going to get 4,000 to 8,000 views. That's how big it goes out.
Right.
And then if it's high engaging, it's going to be more than that. And if it's less engaging, it's going to be less than that. And the algorithms are really quick at figuring out how engaging something is right away.
Mm-hmm. And a video that's 40 seconds, how does the algorithm deal with that? It seems like perhaps a very small sample may be difficult for it to really get any good data, right?
I mean, no, there's actually a lot of strong signals in that. So, for example, there's everything that people say gets translated into closed captioning. Mm-hmm. Automatically. And then that text file is data mined by machine learning fairness algorithms. And then the classifications that are assigned to that, like how brand friendly this is, will then be used on what's called Twiddler. These are all my disclosure, by the way, a Twiddler system to re-rank the content. So one of the things that YouTube has said that it's fighting against is fake news like Pizzagate. Well, here's a video that is about Pizzagate, and it's somehow slipping through all the censors.
Right. The other thing that really struck me about it as being kind of confusing is that it really didn't reveal any new information. It was dealing really with information and material that had all come out in 2016, and frankly, nobody went to jail for it. Now, I started asking Kevin via text just a few questions like, how did this thing get so many views in 3 days, 100,000 views? This was before the movie came out. I was talking just about the 40-second trailer of somebody asking Kevin, is the CIA involved in Hollywood? And he says, oh, definitely. And that thing got 100,000 views. It seemed like a lot of views. When I started asking Kevin about it, he was unusually tight-lipped. Kevin and I have a good relationship. People who've been watching Crowdsource the Truth know we do a weekly show, or we previously did a weekly show. And we've had lengthy conversations on the phone where we would talk about things that are going on. We did a whole series on the Hammer and spoke extensively about evidence and the people that were involved, etc. So when I asked him if this is Tiffany's movie, he said yes. Then I asked him how it got so many views and why she wasn't associated with it at all, and he said no idea, which was strange. So I tried calling him, didn't answer the phone. I tried calling him for several days, and he just didn't answer the phone. Now, sometimes Kevin is very busy. He gets interviewed by a lot of other channels. He's running an off-grid farm. But it started to get to the point where it just seemed unusual, a week of not calling, not returning calls, very tight-lipped answers to very direct questions via text. And I just began to become really curious. I contacted Tiffany as well, and she also refused to answer the phone. In the case of Tiffany, she texted back and said, oh, I'll call you when I'm off the phone, and then didn't call me back. And the next day, I texted her again and asked her if we could talk that day. I asked if she was angry at me for some reason. She said no. She didn't call me back. And I just began to get the feeling that they were both avoiding me. And the harder we pressed on this question, the more both of them resisted. Now, Zach, you tweeted out some excerpts from a lawsuit. Do you want to fill us in on that part of the story?
Yeah, let's see if I can get into a screen share.
Yeah.
Sorry about this. I don't know how to do it.
If you just click on the video image in the lower right, I think you'll see 3 dots that say more options or something. Yeah, screen share.
It's actually beside the heart. Share screen.
Okay, got it. Sorry for this.
So I've included in today's image, in the background, we can see above the flames in the Hollywood Hills, a picture of Ricky Garcia. Now, this was supposed to be a film about the CIA and their integration in Hollywood, as well as sexual abuse in Hollywood. We spoke about Pizzagate, etc. Okay, so you've got the lawsuit there.
Mm-hmm.
This is a lawsuit that Ricky Garcia... Oh, sorry.
Oh, this is a different lawsuit.
Right. Yeah, we've got 2 lawsuits. There's Mike Smith, the producer of the film, who is suing Tiffany Fitzhenry. Now, this is not a video that's intended to attack any of the participants of this film. It's also not intended to defend any of the participants of this film. We're just going through some information that we have all come across that causes us to believe that there's something about this film that Tiffany and Kevin don't want to speak to me about. And they're obviously under no obligation to do that. When people who I think are associates or friends start behaving in ways that are vastly different than they have in the past, I just become curious. And, Kevin ultimately did call me back. I was on air when he called and he left a message. In the message, he said he was checking in and he would call me later that day. Or, later, I think is what he said. And the next morning at 8:45, he sent me a text saying he's not going to be doing shows on Crowdsource the Truth anymore, and he didn't want to talk about this. So, Zach, you had brought to light this lawsuit. Why don't you tell us what you got here?
Yeah, so...
Well, this is a different lawsuit. This is not the right lawsuit.
This is plaintiff Mike Smith.
No.
What we've got on the screen share is the lawsuit of Ricky versus his
This one.
manager
Yeah.
and stuff. But we've got the Tiffany lawsuit here on screen. If you can
Yeah,
see my
right
screen
here.
share to use, Zach, there we go.
Yes,
So Mike
exactly.
Smith is suing Tiffany Fitzhenry. Now, this is the thing. Kevin could have gotten on the phone with me or sent me a text saying, hey, there was a fight among the producers. There's a lawsuit coming. It's a big disaster. I'd rather not talk about it on our show. I don't want you getting involved in a lawsuit. I don't want to get in a lawsuit. He could have said that. This is public. Even if it was a pending lawsuit, he could have said, there's a fight. You should stay out of it. He just avoided it in a way that really made me suspicious. And I told him, I think you're hiding something from me. And he just still wouldn't tell me about it.
Yeah. So this lawsuit came to my attention because someone by the name of Caroline Elise posted the pages of this lawsuit to their Twitter account. And, reading through the lawsuit, you have to sort of read between the self-aggrandizing virtue signaling, which just litters the whole thing, and just look at the facts. Like when I look at something, I say, well, what's the facts, of what's going on here? And what I see in this lawsuit is a person alleging that Tiffany believed that her film was taken inappropriately by these people and then mixed into a movie. And so when the movie released, Tiffany sent a text message saying, and this is all public in this lawsuit, that calling them frauds.
Right.
And
she sent a text message
history,
to Mike Smith and his wife, right?
Yeah, and I think it says that there's a couple other people as well. But it was a small private group that she sent a text message alleging that what they had done was fraudulent activity.
Well, let's take a step back before that, because what we can glean from this lawsuit is that the dispute came about when Tiffany identified this child star victim, alleged victim, Ricky Garcia, who was a contestant on the X Factor and he became a singing sensation, a member of a boy band after Simon Cowell saw him on X Factor and, got him a career. There's a separate lawsuit that you've got on your screen share, which is Ricky Garcia versus Joby Hart and several other entities,
Yes.
in which Ricky Garcia alleges that he was groomed and ultimately sexually abused and even passed around, used as bait, etc. There are a number of allegations in this Ricky Garcia versus Joby Hart et al. Lawsuit, which frankly deserve attention. They are seemingly credible allegations that are properly pled in a legitimate lawsuit. There's been a response from attorneys from the APA agency. Tyler Grasham is another individual named in this lawsuit. He's a former employee of the APA agency. And as I understand from reading the lawsuit, Grasham was fired for a previous sexual impropriety allegation. And although none of this is conclusive proof, all of these things are certainly viable evidence and allegations that deserve attention. So Tiffany brought this to the production saying that she wanted to include Ricky's story in the movie. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And she even she even published an interview.
Which is taken away.
Which has now been taken down, of Tammy, Nikki Garcia's mother. And she gave testimony that apparently ruffled some feathers.
Tammy gave testimony that ruffled feathers.
Yeah. And so, what happened, and this is according to the information in this lawsuit here, Liz Crokin and Kevin Shipp warned Tiffany that supposedly this Ricky Garcia was not a credible candidate, and that including him in the movie would discredit the movie itself. Now, I find that surprising because the defendant, who Ricky is suing now, has since resigned or been fired because of sexual misconduct.
Well, I think he was fired in 2017. When I read the response from APA, what they said is they are no longer associated with Grasham. He was fired years ago. They have no idea what went on between Garcia and Grasham, and they threatened sanctions against Garcia's lawyer because there is an obligation on the lawyer to determine if the allegations are credible. Now, the thing that's important about this, guys, is that there are multiple defendants in this lawsuit. And just because the allegations against one particular defendant may not be credible, it doesn't discredit all of the allegations. Now, I haven't spoken to any of the lawyers. I haven't spoken to Ricky Garcia. But this notion of a lawyer threatening their opponent with sanctions, that's happening all the time. And a lawyer alleging that these allegations aren't credible doesn't make them not credible. And in trying to, I invited each of these people to speak to me, and they obviously have no obligation to do that, but I considered them colleagues, and just in trying to unwind this, I think it would have been beneficial for either Kevin or Tiffany to discuss the details with us. We're trying to unravel this from reading the lawsuits, and as I understand it, they just didn't want the Ricky Garcia thing in the movie, primarily because of a claim that's not in the lawsuit, but against another very well-known actor who we're not going to mention because he's not named in the lawsuit. The thing that I can't get around is, why wouldn't they just report on the lawsuit, Ricky's allegations, and here's what is alleged, right, Mimi? There can be factual reporting on this without taking a side.
Yes, I'd like to just establish. So I found this lawsuit. It's public in the Santa Monica court. From my understanding, all these other individuals who are named, which is a common tactic, have been dropped other than Joby, the main individual, and that the next court case is scheduled for 2021. And certainly this is public information and seems credible if you read through. This is not an uncommon story that we see where we take advantage of young boys or girls. And even the first line, you can see that it established this in the midst of the Me Too and Time's Up movement to make the point that this is not only happening to females.
Right. And I think that's a very good reason why Ricky Garcia's story needs attention. Again, we're not defending Ricky. We don't have any evidence or information beyond what's in this lawsuit, but it does seem to be a credible set of allegations. The fact that one of the named individuals has already been dismissed from his place of employment for sexual assault, sexual allegations, certainly raises the level of interest. And I mean, if we are to listen to victims, I think Ricky deserves to be listened to. So it's curious to me that they weren't able to come up with some sort of a compromise that would have allowed this information into the documentary. Now, I don't have any idea why Kevin or Mike or Liz Crokin would have put up such a fight. Zach, what else can you tell us about what we know about this?
Well, what we do know is that it was both Kevin and it was Liz Crokin who came out and said that this would not be a credible complaint. And when Tiffany went ahead and posted it, they used the fact that she published testimony from Ricky Garcia's mom as justification for removing her from the project. And that's really the surprising thing, is that, look, this Out of the Shadows, it had a lot of truth to it. But there's some wild allegations in there. And so for the fact that they're saying that this testimony by the family is not credible, but using that same set of, metrics, they're going to say, but accusing Marina Abramovich of being a Satanist is okay. And how do those two things, because if I were to select between one or the other, I would say, well, eyewitness testimony of the abuse victim is more credible than, doing remote psychological diagnoses through a movie.
Right.
Which is what they're doing when they're diagnosing someone as a Satanist. And I'm not defending Satanists. I'm just saying, when I see an inconsistency between judgment levels,
Right.
it starts to make me think and ask questions like, well, why? What's the metric here? What's the motivation between one decision and another decision?
And just to be clear, this is not Ricky or Tammy who requested to be excluded from the movie.
Right.
Is that correct? Just to establish that.
No, this was prompted. I mean, we can see quite clearly from the lawsuit that is, Mike Smith, the stuntman featured in the film, versus Tiffany Fitzhenry. The fight got quite contentious, and this lawsuit was basically, seeking to take ownership of the film. Now, we've heard some interviews with Mike Smith saying that he's putting this out just out of the goodness of his own heart. He's not interested in making money, but yet there is a financial dispute over this. What have you guys determined about some of the shifting statements and shifting position of the business model of this film? Because again, I want to come back to this bloating of the views. It seems like a way to trick people into thinking a lot more people are interested in this than perhaps actually are.
Right. Well, so I'm sorry. What was the question?
I can respond on my take on that. Just basically that I went to the website because the movie was sent to me. I had no idea that Tiffany was involved. I looked at the movie and I was like, oh, that guy looks familiar. Later, I told Zach, I went to a stuntman's house once, like the only stuntman I know. And then I looked on the page and it stated that they're not doing it for financial. I found it strange that on the website there are no credits. There are no credits at the end of the movie. They say that this is for the world. And then they have a donate page for future projects. So how do we know when they're getting money, what it's being used for? That's a little bit talking out of both sides of the mouth. Then I wondered, okay, well, if this guy's really a whistleblower, then likely he's been exiled from Hollywood. So I went to IMDb and I saw that he was listed in pre-production on 2 shows. Of course, amidst coronavirus, we don't know.
I want you to say that again because I think that a lot of people are just going to miss this really important point. Okay, so let me just reiterate. You would expect someone who's blowing the whistle to be so toxic that they would be blacklisted from their industry like I am.
Right.
Or like I am, or like many people are, where they're not wanted. Smear pieces are written about them. It's not a pretty path. So if this guy is really a whistleblower and he puts himself front and center, then you see lists that he's. And then I was like, oh my God, that's the stuntman who I was at his house during the filming post-production of Equilibrium. Because my boyfriend was working on my ex was working on the show. So that was coincidental. Then I noticed that there's virtue signaling and there's a lot of talk about being a patriot and being JC lover, Christian. And then you find out they're lobbying a lawsuit against someone who was involved. And that's not very Christian or patriotic. So there's it's weird. There's just some fishiness.
I agree with what you're saying. And again, we're not making any accusations against the people we're talking about. We're just remarking that it seems strange that we've got good relationships with some of the people and they refuse to talk about this. As Mimi and Zach are pointing out, Mike Smith, the stuntman who is featured in the film, he remains involved in productions in Hollywood. And if he's blowing the whistle on Hollywood, but simultaneously being paid by them, that raises some interesting questions. And just to let people know exactly what was going on, he was the stunt coordinator on a film called Unhinged, which this is a major film. The star is Russell Crowe. So Russell Crowe is not appearing in some YouTube production. He's not appearing in some independent production. And to be the stunt coordinator on a stunt-heavy film that might feature an action star like Russell Crowe, it's a substantial job. He could be the director of the second unit. There's a lot of things that the stunt coordinator gets into. And while people might think, oh, well, maybe he got into that before the film came out, he's now the stunt coordinator on another film that's in pre-production. So it would seem that these people would know what's going on as far as him blowing the whistle on Hollywood and saying that the CIA is in there. You would think that the people that want to expose this type of corruption and criminality and wrongdoing would be interested in exposing a story about a manager grooming a 12-year-old boy, at least exploring the allegations and presenting them. Because frankly, from a journalistic standpoint, if it turns out that the allegations are untrue, that's a story as well, right?
I want to read a little bit from the complaint, which is on page 5. And so on and around January 4th, 2020, Tiff published an extremely ill-advised tweet in which she stated that actor Chris Pratt had hosted a party at his home where a minor was plied with alcohol and sex and trafficked to Hollywood elite. And then she claimed, to anyone who might try to come after me for this tweet, I have court documents that corroborate this claim and first-person witness testimony. So it continues, on information and belief, no court documents backed up Tiffany's allegations against Chris Pratt, nor was Mr. Pratt even mentioned in Ricky Garcia's court complaint against his manager. Now,
that's true.
This seems to be like, if you're suing for sex trafficking and being poured out to, your manager's friends, you would think that if you just got to someone's house, that might be so minor of an infraction in comparison to the totality of what has happened to you that you might not even just have them as part of the lawsuit. So the fact that, if this were true, Chris Pratt would be named in the lawsuit. No, that's not actually a true statement, right? This seems to be just like part of the story that came out during the testimony. And so anyways, it continues. Mr. Smith specifically warned Ms. Fitzhenry against her course of action because her allegations appeared uncorroborated and would harm not only Mr. Pratt's reputation, but also Ms. Fitzhenry's credibility. Ms. Crokin warned Ms. Fitzhenry that the publication of slanderous material, now that's presumptive, that it's slanderous, right, would certainly lead to a legal letter from Mr. Pratt or a member of his team. Indeed, just a day or two later, she received a cease and desist letter. She ultimately deleted both the offensive tweet and other content on her social media platforms. But after the Pratt fiasco, both Kevin Shipp, former CIA agent, and Liz Crokin, the journalist, indicated that they would withdraw from the film if Tiffany Fitzhenry was attached to it in any way. After this incident, there was a series of phone calls, yada, yada, yada. She says, Tiff, if you want to take me out of the documentary, I understand. Mr. Smith initially suggested waiting a few days, but ultimately had to explain to Ms. Fitzhenry that as a result of her actions, Mr. Shipp and Ms. Crokin had withdrawn from the project and refused to return if Ms. Fitzhenry remained a participant. Furthermore, Mr. Smith explained that the project was destined for complete failure without Mr. Shipp and Ms. Crokin. He then asked Ms. Fitzhenry to withdraw from the project, and Ms. Fitzhenry agreed. Mr. Smith offered to return any materials Ms. Fitzhenry wanted for her own use, but she responded that Mr. Smith could keep them because she continued to believe in the importance of the project.
Well, see, I certainly agree that making any allegation against someone, particularly a well-known person that's not backed by evidence, is something very irresponsible. But the parts of this that I don't understand is why Kevin wouldn't have just gotten on the phone with me during the 2 weeks I was trying to communicate with him about this and explain that Tiffany had done this and he didn't want to be involved. I remember through the 2 years that this was all happening that, there were some conversations. Nothing seemed anything out of the ordinary for the type of disputes that people get into when they're doing these type of creative projects. It just seemed strange that they got to this point of irreconcilable differences and neither Tiffany nor Kevin would talk to me about it. Like, why was there no answer about this? None of this addresses the fact that the thing got 1 million views right away or 10 million views right away. I looked up this list of the most viewed videos, and when you compare the performance of this film to things like Taylor Swift videos, it's quite surprising how many views it's gotten. I mean, certainly in a private phone call, if Kevin had told me that he's not doing anything with the promotion of the film, he doesn't know how it's getting views, he said that in a text, but the fact is he was just evasive about this, and the more I was asking, why couldn't he tell me? Ricky Garcia has a lawsuit. Tiffany made accusations that I didn't agree with. Why not tell me that? And furthermore, while he's got all this attention on him, I hadn't even asked him to do a show on Crowdsource the Truth about this movie or any of this stuff. But he was doing interviews with other channels about it, and it just seems strange to me that he would provide that sort of content to another channel when I've done so much work to help him monetize his social media platform. Why not offer Crowdsource the Truth viewers the opportunity to see that? It all just collectively seemed strange.
Yeah, it seems overly secretive.
Right.
And I don't understand why there's so much secrecy around this sort of thing. Why these people in private? I mean, thank God this lawsuit was launched so we could actually see how these people operate on the inside. And the question I have is that, the description here is pretty appalling, but, maybe Mike Smith's lawsuit misrepresented, the apparent facts of the case. And so then the question, then gets begged, like, is Mike Smith being truthful in his lawsuit here? And Liz Crokin and Kevin Shipp have what appears to be bad behavior? Or is Mike Smith not telling the truth and he's just trying to use rhetoric and exaggeration of facts because he wants to have this, what I believe is a frivolous lawsuit, more teeth.
We lost your sound there, Mimi.
Yeah, we lost your sound.
And again, we're not accusing Mike Smith of being untruthful in his lawsuit. We're just looking at all of these things and we're asking questions that these people have refused to answer. I think it's pretty likely that Kevin and Tiffany are going to become angry that we're talking about this. And I arrive at that conclusion based on their choice to not speak to me about it, tell me they would call me and then not call me. It's all very strange. Mimi, are you back with us?
Yes, I was going to just establish a couple of things. One, this film, maybe if you're a normie, has done a lot of good. So let's focus on the goodness of it. Maybe for people who are privy to what's going on in the swamps, that this is nothing new. And wow, why did it spread like wildfire? And I also noted that. And it seems, of course, this is just conjecture, that something happened where both parties are not talking. Is it possible that Hollywood knew this truth was coming out and wanted to control the narrative, and this is a very tempered version of what's going on?
Well, what you're talking about, Mimi, is a limited hangout. And, this is what I was wondering as well. Why would there be so much attention on a film? Not why, but in other words, we've got this film that's supposedly blowing the whistle on Hollywood, but it's really not releasing anything that we haven't seen before. And then I was also very curious because, we've got this other film that was released right around the same time, this film called Pedogate 2020. Now, this is a film about some of the same topics. However, this film did expose new evidence, did reveal new individuals who, even to those of us who have followed these matters very closely, nobody had heard about this before. Kind of similar to the Ricky Garcia story. I didn't hear about Ricky Garcia when we were hearing about Comet Pizza and Marina Abramovich, but the more attention we put on new information, particularly given all this stuff that came out in 2016 hasn't resulted in anybody going to jail, it really makes it fairly innocuous to discuss in a film, and it's not really this bombshell whistleblowing thing that we might hope that it is. Now, this Pedogate 2020 film, it's been removed from YouTube. People can still see it on BitChute. It's created by a very talented documentarian and investigative journalist who goes by Mouthy Buddha. And, again, people might wonder, what's the purpose of a limited hangout? Well, if they can draw a lot of people's attention to this material that's not revealing anything new, that's not exposing potential child trafficking, child rape, some of the things that Ricky Garcia is alleging, it becomes this very safe thing that actually is not a whistleblower activity at all. And when we see the people involved don't want to have an honest conversation with colleagues and people who believed that they were trusted friends, confidants, they're just behaving strangely. And it's this total collection of strange circumstances that cause us to ask these questions. Now, Zach, Kevin put out a tweet yesterday that was a bit offensive, frankly. What do you want to say about that, if anything?
Right. So if you could just go to the tweet, because I'm having trouble with screen share. Kevin and Mike have been laying low for a couple days and not really addressing any of the things that I've exposed through my own Twitter account on this lawsuit. And then all of a sudden, this tweet came out saying, the documentary Out of the Shadows is already drawing attacks against those of us who appeared in the film. We knew this would come when the film was released and were prepared for it. The film exposes dark powers, and those powers are not happy. And it's just like, well, I'm not attacking. First off, I'm not attacking the film. I'm trying to ask questions here of why is there a lawsuit being filed against one of the writers and filmmakers? And two, why is Kevin Shipp and Liz Crokin have the appearance of collusion to suppress a bombshell rape victim coming forward and having a platform to talk about his lawsuit against a Hollywood executive?
Right.
Yeah. Very legitimate questions.
I do want to add, we've got Trauma Mama with us in the YouTube comments, regular viewer, who rightly says, Kevin does not owe me an explanation. And that's not what I'm saying. I agree. He doesn't. What I'm pointing out is that the way that he behaved is substantially different than how he has behaved to me in the past. He's always been open and talking about these things. I'm not attacking him. I'm just saying, why did this get so many views? How did this get so many views? I do not believe it is organically resulting from the popularity of the content or any of that. I also found it strange that, Kevin said he didn't have time to do interviews on Crowdsource the Truth, but it seems that he actually wasn't being completely honest, that he chose to use the time that he had to do interviews elsewhere. And again, if he had gotten on the phone with me and said, there's a fight between the producers, the whole thing has become a big disaster, I don't want to get involved with it, I don't want you to get involved with it, I've made a commitment to promote it here, there, and this way and that, I would have said fine. And again, there's no obligation for Kevin to do any of this. The only reason I'm saying it is his failure to do it has just caused me to ask more questions. And as Mimi and Zach have pointed out, there's an allegation that Tiffany wanted to make money from the movie and Mike did not. But there is this donate button right here. And certainly if you can drive viewers by doing some of the things that Zach was talking about with click farms and whatever, it doesn't seem like an entirely if this is what's being done, and we're not saying that it is, if fake views are being put onto this video and then a donate button is offered, as Zach has told us, buying 1 million fake views in the first hour that a video is out will artificially manipulate the Google algorithm such that the video gets boosted. I mean, maybe some people would say that's a legitimate way to advertise the video. I don't really agree with that. But to have a lawsuit that says you don't want to make any money from it and then have a website that is asking people to donate to you seems like a contradiction.
Also,
mean,
if you're yeah, sorry.
well, I want to add to this is that there's a logical contradiction within the defamation lawsuit itself.
Yeah.
It says that Mike and Tiff had differences in opinion on the funding model, and that this ultimately was one of the big contributing factors for them parting ways. But then it goes on to say that they agreed to a free for everyone, but for a donation back in December. And so, how can one be characterized as irreconcilable differences if in the same, a few pages later, it states that they actually came to an agreement?
Right. Right. So what we're just asking about are the sort of incongruent elements of this whole entire thing. We just sort of, maybe when you get the feeling that someone's not being honest with you, it's certainly not an allegation that they're lying. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And this isn't a video that we did one day after this thing came out. I think it was released something like 20 days ago. I literally spent 2 weeks trying to get an answer to some of these questions, and the more I asked, the more resistance there was. So we're putting this question out publicly. We want to know what's going on here. Why were they not able to arrive at an agreement to include the Ricky Garcia lawsuit and his story and his information while eliminating this information? And look, even if they didn't like Tiffany's approach to doing it, this is an important story. Why suppress Ricky's story because they don't like how Tiffany behaves as a journalist? It seems like a really concerted effort to keep Ricky's story out.
Why also not list any credits at the end of the movie or be so ambiguous on your website? Certainly Mike is front and center here, and he's been embedded in Hollywood, and sure, he has a legitimate story, but it's hypocritical to present this to people who want the truth, and then for truthers to ask legitimate journalists, whistleblowers asking questions, and then have a lack of transparency that only piques more doubt.
Yeah.
And questions.
Agreed.
It's bizarre.
Agreed. So this is basically what we've got. Zach, what else would you like to add, if anything?
I would like to add that, we reached out to Tammy Garcia. She originally was going to appear and talk with us and give her side of the story, because the thing that's sad about this whole thing is that Ricky's story got pulled down.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, we're in the front lines fighting the deep state. And the thing is that you got to expect that the wind's not going to go your way sometimes. And I really feel bad that Ricky wasn't able to get his story out there and published. And so what I want to add to this is an opportunity for Ricky to, step forward. There's allegations here that your lawsuit is incredible, that you've made some errors in the way that you've handled yourself in bringing this forward. I think that Ricky, if you want to have a platform, or, Ricky's mom, Tammy, if you want to have a platform to talk about this, we invite you on the show so that, you can explain to the people what your side of what happened went down. And whether, what is Ricky's story? How does a bright-eyed kid thinking the world's going to open up to him get sort of brought into, the seedy underground that isn't talked about that often.
Right.
And, that's the thing here, is that, I look at this kid and I'm like, in my judgment, his allegation is credible. I would expect that. Yeah. He went to the trouble of suing someone, and you can tell that, when someone's powerful, they threaten the lawyer saying, this is a false charge and we're going to personally bring hell upon the lawyer. These people obviously know that that's going to happen, to bring a lawsuit like that. They know that they're going to draw fire. And despite the personal risks for themselves, they brought it anyways. And so I have a tendency to believe this kid. And when I see the thing, Kevin Shipp is so self-aggrandizing and self-congratulating and so pious. And I say, okay, Kevin Shipp is a pious guy who believes in the teachings of Jesus Christ. And then you go and you read this lawsuit and you're like, what the heck? Is this the same guy? Like, why is this person being depicted in this defamation lawsuit, Kevin Shipp, so differently than his public face on Twitter?
Well, how do you mean?
Well, Kevin Shipp is talking about it's all for the children, yet he's conspiring with Liz Crokin. It's very clear in this defamation lawsuit that he's conspiring with Liz Crokin in order to sabotage Ricky Garcia's disclosure through Out of the Shadows.
Well, I would caution you to stop short
Yeah.
of accusing them of conspiring. They're in agreement, and it is possible that Tiffany presented information in a way that they felt was irresponsible. The part that I can't reconcile is, why were they not able to separate the allegations that are not credible and say, look, Tiffany, you got to take that down, and we're interested in Ricky's story, we're interested in Tammy's story, but you can't go mentioning aspects of it that were not in the original lawsuit. We certainly don't. This suit from Mike versus Tiffany alleges that Tiffany said and did certain things that would constitute very irresponsible journalism, saying that she wanted to include these allegations and just put them out there to see what the response would be. I would agree with Kevin Shipp if he didn't want to be involved in that type of activity. But again, I think there's a way, particularly if these people have been working together for a year and a half or however long they've been working on this movie, I think there's a way to say, look, there's a story here and we can report on aspects of it, but we don't want to embellish it. We don't want to accuse people who aren't involved. Let's just talk about Joby Hart and Ricky Garcia and the credible allegations in the lawsuit. I'm confused that that wasn't something that they were able to do, and I became even more confused that they didn't even want to speak about it, to the extent that they could have just said, there's a lawsuit and we don't want to talk about it. It's a big hot mess. You don't want to get involved. Even that wasn't said.
Yeah, so basically what I'm hearing you say, well, the movie lacks teeth in that there's an actual substantial lawsuit that depicts what's going on in Hollywood, and it's not being
seems like an undue effort to keep that part of the information out. The one new piece of information, and people are saying it's not new. Jamie Deluxe had exposed this guy. That might be true, but I've never heard about him before, and I follow these things pretty closely. I've heard about Comet Pizza. I've heard about the CIA being involved with Hollywood. By the way, I think it's public information. They're not exposing some big secret operation to say that the CIA approves scripts about American Made and that the CIA approves scripts about Zero Dark 30. We know that. They even say in the credits of the film that the Department of Defense or whoever is assisting them. They're using sometimes military facilities and equipment.
Consulting.
It's obvious, right? So again, the question that we pose is, why was it impossible to arrive at some sort of understanding that would have used the legitimate aspects? There is a lawsuit. There are allegations. Here's what's about to happen. Because frankly, in my view, that would have energized this film with a new, updated piece of information, sort of saying, look, for people who don't know about this, here's all the stuff that the general public learned in 2016. Alefantis, and they talk about Abramovich and all these things that were revealed through the Pizzagate thing, and how Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, all this stuff. But if that had tied together to this ongoing lawsuit, that would have given it the teeth that so many people feel it doesn't have.
Yeah, agreed. Also, if Ricky says in the suit, it says that he's, because of the stress, the emotional, all of the abuse, that has taken a hiatus from Hollywood. He's active on Instagram, and he seems like a very sweet, beautiful. I looked at some of his posts. I did a poem on patience. Some of his Yeah, he's been affected, and maybe because there's a future court date, maybe there's a gag order. They've been told not to speak. Even stating that would be an explanation.
Well, exactly. And I don't think there would necessarily be a gag order from the court, but a lot of lawyers might advise their clients not to speak about it. And again, I
Yeah.
think a simple phone call throughout the 2 weeks that I was trying to reach both Kevin and Tiffany, or even a short email just saying, look, there's a whole battle going on. We're not involved with promoting it. None of that was said. And as people have pointed out, they don't owe me these explanations, but yeah, so we got Mr. Willie pointing out that we showed yesterday the CIA symbol in Peter Nygaard's plane. Mr. Willie feels that that indicates that they're connected, and this is why we're talking about this. We have reason to believe that they could be connected. And that's not to say that anyone specifically that we're talking about, but the connection between Hollywood, the CIA, these international pedophilia rings, the grooming of young children, that just seemed like a very relevant piece of information, that there's a huge amount of weird behavior surrounding. I think we've said everything we can say about this for right now. Mimi, anything you'd like to say in closing?
I'd just like to say that from my Tiffany doesn't want to be associated with this movie, and is happy to give it to the world, and hopefully it does good in helping waking people up. And also, you had noted the other day that the release of the film is interesting. Why they chose to do it now, I would imagine, having released the film, you put in some thought on the release date.
Yeah.
Not. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, but
well,
that's all.
It's my personal feeling. If I were involved, I would not have released this film right at the height of an unprecedented viral pandemic when most people are very focused on that. Now, the counterpoint is somebody might say, well, everybody's home looking for stuff to watch. I could picture myself in a meeting with a fellow producer arguing to release it now. I would say, I think we should wait until the pandemic is over and, people aren't so concerned about their health, because it also seems anomalous to me that video, having nothing to do with coronavirus, releasing no new information, why did this video suddenly get 10 million views right now? I don't believe it's just because everybody's at home, because there's a lot of very well-known people releasing a lot of videos about a lot of things. And this just seems anomalous. Zach, what do you think?
I mean, I think that, it kind of came out of left field, and it drowned out a lot of legitimate movies that were dropping names. And I think that, I like Occam's razor. I like to think about a solution that fits all the angles. And I think that what's happening is that, we're in a period of disclosure where we're kind of telling the normies, yeah, everything's kind of controlled and we're going through a phase change. And the people that have done really bad things don't want to get outed. And so I think that at this point, the choice between letting people know specific criminals versus letting people know in generally that there's bad things that have happened, I think that, the deep state would want to have the latter. They would want people to know that it happens, but then, the powerful families are going to be doing maneuvers behind the scenes to make sure that they're not outed.
Yeah.
And so then no one personally takes blame for a lot of this stuff.
I agree.
People's attention spans are really short. Like, they're going to be like, oh my God, this is really horrible. And then, a bunch of Hollywood actors just don't tweet anymore. And then we just forget about them because,
right.
We're an information overload.
Yeah.
And so, and essentially that's what's it. Like, that's the theory that I have that makes this make sense, is that it's essentially a limited hangout. Like, yeah. I'm really glad that it woke up a lot of people. I had a friend of mine who doesn't like the news, doesn't like politics. And she called me up and she's like, oh my God, have you seen Out of the Shadows? Is this stuff real? And I was like, yeah, it happens. And now she's like doing all this other research. And so I want to tell you guys that were involved in this movie, like, great job. You guys got it out there, but us questioning whether, and legitimate questions about whether this amplification might have been slightly artificial. You know, maybe there was a group of people that were orchestrating this particular movie to be the one that got big, so that the other ones would go away by being oversaturated by an oversaturated market and censorship.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I get that feeling, especially since it has no real teeth or no real new information. And I do believe someone came in and is controlling the narrative here. It's like they do that. They tell us in plain sight what's going on. Just listen to the pressers. I mean, it's a tactic. It serves as a disclaimer.
Right. Well, one of the things that Mike Smith directly states in the film is that, you know, the reason why the CIA intervenes in Hollywood is because they don't want anyone who has the influence to communicate to the masses to do that without control of the influence. And then we see all these things that seem to indicate that perhaps these guys aren't whistleblowing and being independent in their disclosures of information in the way that they claim to be. This is the reason why we're making this video right here. There were multiple opportunities for Kevin, multiple opportunities for Tiffany to explain this to us. Granted, they don't owe us that explanation, but when somebody behaves inconsistently and you question it and they don't explain it, we've got a right to question it.
Yep.
And it's still not too late if those people want to come forth to shed some light. The invitation stands to listen to both sides and offer that. We want to learn more.
Yeah, and I think that people should also keep their eyes and ears on Ricky Garcia's story. People who are trying to create careers for themselves and find themselves trafficked, abused, sexually assaulted. I mean, this is life-destroying stuff. So I think we certainly owe victims that due, and to suppress their stories, particularly important stories like this, for whatever reason, rather than finding some sort of compromise that could include that information, it all just seems incongruent to me. So I want to thank you guys for joining me today. I want to thank you for the assistance you provided in locating these legal documents and for coming forward. We're certainly going to be, I think, the subjects of anger from some of these people.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know they're fairly litigious. One thing I just wanted to say in closing, in looking at this lawsuit, you can never really anticipate what motivates someone, but, the notion that this guy who says that he's putting this out for the good of everything and not wanting money from it and everything, and then turning around and suing Tiffany allegedly for money, the causes of action are liable. He's basically saying that Tiffany wrote a false statement to him and his wife and people who already knew him. He's technically right that it is liable to call somebody fraud and to publish it to third parties if there's not evidence that they've committed fraud. But when it's your wife, that's a little different than when it's public. And the notion that this would prompt a lawsuit, it's maybe a stretch of the imagination. We've seen other examples in social media and mainstream media where lawsuits similar to this brought against journalists who have said things that one party alleges is false or fraudulent. We've seen many examples of these sort of slap lawsuits, strategic lawsuits against public participation, where this type of thing is brought as an oppressive action to stop someone from speaking. And again, when we have all these questions about all the things surrounding this movie, we want to know more about this.
Yep.
Agreed.
All right, guys. Well, I want to thank everybody for watching, and I want to thank the two of you. Enjoy yourselves, staying safe from the coronavirus, and we'll see where this line of inquiry goes. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for watching.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Jason.
Thank you both. Bye, Jason.